Thanks. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so I hope my voice holds out. It's just to the stage where one of my ears is stopped up, so I can hear myself very well right now, but I'm not quite sure if you can hear me. And I hate hearing myself, so it's kind of annoying. But I'm really glad to be here. And I'm going to talk to you about experiences, seeming, and perceptual justification today. So the main model that I have in mind that I want to think about epistemological consequences of is one that draws a threefold distinction. So say you're looking at an object. In the paper I use just a banana, just an ordinary object. You're going to have, if it's in ordinary light, you're going to have certain experiences of it. And that's the first of the three distinctions that I want to make. So you have an experience of it, it's got a phenomenal character, something it's like to see the banana. And it presents you with a certain shape and a certain color, maybe other properties as well. That then, well, at least given the distinctions that I want to toy with in the paper, gives rise to states that that are propositional seemings. So propositional seeming is supposed to be this. It's just a conscious mental state where some proposition seems true to you, or it has the appearance of being the case. So, looking at the banana, it's going to seem to you, it will naturally seem to you that there's a banana on the table, that there's something yellow on the table, lots of different propositions could occur as a propositional seeming. And then that, in turn, will give rise to a belief of various kinds about your environment, like the belief that there's a banana on the table, the belief that there's something yellow on the table, etc. So I'm going to try to, I'm partly borrowing this distinction, but in the first section of the paper, I'll give you some reason to think that there really are these three separate things, that experiences are different from seemings, and seemings are different from beliefs. The main purpose, though, of the papers is to try to spin out a plausible epistemology based on this distinction. So I want to look at, in particular, the epistemology of what I'm calling simple recognitional beliefs. So a simple recognitional belief, as I'm using that term, is just a belief like there's a banana or there's something yellow. It's just a case where you look at something in your environment and you visually recognize it as having some property or being some kind of a thing. It's simple, though, because it also has a kind of non-inferential phenomenology. So when you see the banana and you think there's a banana, I'm attracted by the view that there's nothing overly complicated about that. It doesn't seem like you're inferring it from lots of background beliefs that you hold. In fact, people might describe it as just a proposition that they just see it to be true, right? I mean, if you ask why do you believe that there's a banana on the table, or why do you believe that there's something yellow on the table, it's hard to know what to say other than just, I see the banana on the table. I see that there's a banana on the table, something along those lines. So simple visual recognitional beliefs are just my name for any belief that's like that where you recognize some feature in your environment visually, and it doesn't seem like it came from a fancy influence. So I'm going to go with a working assumption for the paper too, and the working assumption is that simple recognitional beliefs, at least some of them, enjoy foundational justification. So the justification you have for those beliefs doesn't depend on further beliefs that you hold. It would actually be okay, I think, from the point of view of the paper, if it depended on some background belief, like that you're functioning well or something like that. But it doesn't depend on a kind of inference about the banana in particular, or some kind of inference from sense data or anything of that sort. So here's the reasons for making that assumption. I've got a couple. I mean, one, it just seems to fit with the phenomenology of what happens when you form simple recognitional beliefs. They don't seem to involve inference. So if you're attracted by an epistemology that starts with intuitions about really clear cases of justification and of knowledge, these simple recognitional beliefs seem like just paradigm cases. So let's start with the idea that they are foundationally justified, that they're so it's not like any of this is new. Lots of people have defended the idea that certain perceptual beliefs are foundationally justified, from Thomas Reid on through to Chisholm and Jim Pryor, etc. So here's then how I want to mine this distinction. If you make the distinction between experiences and seemings and beliefs, there's some possibilities open to you for saying that simple recognitional beliefs are foundationally justified. That is, they don't depend on background beliefs to serve as reasons for them. You don't need an inference. You don't need a background belief to serve as your reason for believing that there's a banana on the table or that there's something yellow on the table. But we don't want to say, at least I don't want to say, that simple recognitional beliefs are just groundless, right? I mean, it does seem like the experience is playing a role in making the belief rational and making the belief justified. And if you make this distinction, you might try a couple of things. So you might say, well, it's the experience. This is what I'll later call the experiential content principle. I'm going to argue against it later on in the paper. But one idea might be, well, experiences have certain contents. So when you see a banana on the table, it's got the content that there's a thing that's yellow, right, on the table. So as long as you form a belief that matches that content, as long as you form a belief that there's something yellow on the table, and base it properly on that experiential content, you're going to be justified, right? Or just generally, if experience has some content to it, that there's something that's a certain shape or some color, that's going to give you defeasible justification for a belief that the content is correct, right? That the content expresses a truth. So that's one idea you might have. A separate idea that's in the literature, and I have it in mind here, Michael Huemer, who defends this view, Chris Tucker recently defends this view, is a view called phenomenal conservatism, where the thing that's doing the justifying work when you're justified in having a recognitional belief isn't the experience, it's really the seeming state that comes after it. So it's the fact that you had this experience of the banana, and then it seemed to you that there's a banana on the table. It's the seeming, according to them, that provides justification, that provides a reason for the belief that justifies. And I'm going to argue against that view as well in the third section of the paper. And then a third thing you might think, on your handout is that seemings, but only seemings of a certain sort are the ones that justify or give reasons for simple recognitional beliefs. So only seemings that are appropriately grounded in experience serve as reasons. So that's a view I'm going to call restricted phenomenal conservatism. So it's the view that the seemings give you reason. Having a propositional seeming gives you a reason for a belief, but not all seemings justify. Only ones that have the right sort of relation to experience. Those are the ones that give you reasons and that justify simple recognitional beliefs. I'm going to argue against one version of that view, although I'm quite sympathetic to something like that working. So Britt Brogard has recently defended a view that falls in this category. She calls it sensible dogmatism. And I'm going to argue that it's not so sensible. There's some problems with it. And then I'll try to give you some advice for what to say to try to fix it up. So that's the structure of the paper. We'll start with by me trying to convince you of this threefold distinction, or me offering some reasons for it. And then we'll take it for granted and think about these different justification principles for how simple recognitional beliefs might be based on either experiences or seemings, and how that might explain their foundational justification. All right, so I should say, I mean, I'm open to clarificatory questions or things of that sort, as we go. So this doesn't have to be super formal. If anyone wants to interject or if something's just not clear, please stop me. So first stab. Of the three, experiences, seemings, and beliefs, I'm guessing that seemings are the ones that are least familiar, maybe most controversial, or maybe just hardest to separate from experiences, if you've got that kind of category in your mental ontology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those are supposed to be. So the central notion of a propositional seeming, as I'm thinking of it, is that it's a passive conscious state that has the phenomenology of a proposition felt to be the case. So you consider a proposition, and the proposition has a kind of felt truth to it. So notice one point that's going to be important. If you understand seemings this way, they're not necessarily perceptual. They're not necessarily about your environment. So this is a broad way of capturing them, where when you intuit that 2 + 2 = 4, when that seems to you to be the case, that's a propositional seeming in this sense as well. So it's not really sensory phenomenology that's the reason that makes for a propositional seeming. It's something like, we might say, creedal or cognitive phenomenology. Felt truth is supposed to be what is distinctive about these states. So they can be perceptual, like it's seeming to me that there's a cup in my hand, or they could be the result of memory. Like when I remember the answer to a trivia question, the answer just seems true to me, right? Or I remember what I had for breakfast. That just seems to me that I had bacon and eggs. Or they could be based on a priori reflection, like it's seeming that 2 + 2 = 4. They could be introspective, about my current mental states. Crucially, these are passive rather than willful acts of judgment, for instance. So there's a distinction you can draw between seemings and judgments, where if I judge that something is true, arguably there's something kind of willful about that. Whereas with seemings, you just find yourself in the state, as I'm thinking of it. So you reflect on some question, some proposition, and it just seems true or it doesn't. But that's, whether it does or whether it doesn't, isn't a matter of voluntary control. So you can't just make it seem true to you that some proposition, make some propositions seem true to you. The third point about them is that they admit of degrees, as I'm thinking of them. So Chris Tucker, who is an advocate of seemings and the distinction between the experiences and seemings, he says the same. He says some seemings are very weak, so they're not very assertive. Other seemings are so assertive that they make their contents feel utterly obvious. So I find it helpful to think of these as something like involuntary feelings of confidence. So it's a kind of felt confidence that you have when you consider a proposition. That's the seeming. And a final point about them, we can distinguish between seemings that are the result of a conscious inference and those that are non-inferential. So if you do some reasoning and then the conclusion might come with a seeming, right? Where the seeming that, it might be that seemings, when you do a bit of conscious inference, have kind of the form of, well, the conclusion is true given this evidence, or something along those lines. But the seeming truth of the conclusion is going to be the result of an inference in that case. Not so with the kind of simple ones that I'm considering, or at least it's not a very explicit conscious inference when it seems to me that there's a cup. Okay, so that's a first pass at seemings. Let me contrast them a little bit with beliefs and with experiences to try to get those distinctions. First of all, with beliefs, so I'm largely following Michael Huemer and Chris Tucker here in their characterization of seemings. But there's some pretty clear cases, I think, of seemings without beliefs. So apparent memories, where you've got some counter evidence, you're talking with a sibling about some past event. It seems to you that it happened one way, but they're saying something different, right? The seeming can persist. It can survive that disagreement that you're having, right? So they're kind of robust in a way that beliefs aren't. So you might, given the disagreement with your sibling, give up on the belief, even though it still seems to you, based on memory, that you're right about it and that it happened in a certain way. Or another example might be a priori insight in view of a paradox that it leads to. The seeming can persist. There are common examples in the epistemological literature of that sort of phenomenon. Or just cases of perceptual illusion can also present this. The seeming can persist even after you know it's an illusion, so you're not any more inclined to believe that things are the way the illusion suggests. There are also cases of beliefs without seemings and beliefs without even a disposition for something to seem a certain way. One natural contrast, right, is beliefs can be dispositional beliefs, so they could be occurrent beliefs. But part of what I want to say here is you can't explain beliefs, either occurrent beliefs or dispositional beliefs, in terms of seemings or dispositions to have seemings. So, I'm less convinced about this, that there are beliefs without at least a disposition for something to seem to be the case. But it's not that important for my purposes. And there are common examples that convince people. Prejudices might be one. So, if I have a prejudice, so I don't really believe that all races are equal, right? But it might be, often prejudice works this way, right? If I ever reflect on that, it seems to me all races are equal. The reason you despite that you accuse me of a prejudice is because I act in certain ways, right? Or have certain dispositions to behave that reveal a prejudice that we attribute to. Okay, so there you go. So seemings are separate from beliefs. They're also separate from experiences. So here's a few background assumptions that I'm going to make about experiences and what they are, without much further argument. So by experiences, perceptual experiences, I'm going to take for granted that they're conscious states that can be typed by sensory phenomenology. So what's crucial to them is what it's like to have the experience. And sometimes I'll talk about phenomenal contents of perceptual experiences. So what I mean by that is just the objects, properties, or kinds that are presented in the experience. I use quotey fingers there for that. And directly affect its phenomenal character. So there are debates about this in recent philosophy of mind. If you take the banana case, right? What is it that's affecting what it's like to see the banana? Is it just the kind of color properties of the banana that make up and the shape properties, or does the idea that it's a banana, does that make a difference to what it's like to have that visual experience of the banana, right? Susanna Siegel has argued that high level contents like being a banana or being of natural kind terms can actually be in the experience, a part of what we characterize as the phenomenal character of the visual experience, internal to the visual experience itself. Other people have argued, well, I guess Siegel's argued also that a number of other pretty highfalutin sort of concepts, like causation can occur, there can be a feel of one thing causing another that's in the experience. Yes, some of these debates will bear on some things that I have to say later on, although mostly I'll steer past them. So a big part of what I want to do in the paper, in fact, is to show that even if we just stick to colors and shapes, things that most everyone thinks are phenomenal contents, you can generate lots of epistemological implications and see why some of these epistemic principles that philosophers have defended aren't the case, and see what you'd have to do to develop better ones. So one final background assumption about experiences. I'm going to just take for granted that phenomenal contents include at least some objective features or objects in the environment. So this is more or less just an assumption that sense data theory isn't true. When I see the banana on the table, it's the banana and its properties. So it's at least has the appearance of being out there in the world, has the phenomenology of being out there in the world, and those are the properties that account for the phenomenal character. So there's some controversial assumptions there, but I'm just confessing here to some things that I'll be assuming. So now think about seemings and how they might be distinct from visual experiences characterized by kind of that distinctive phenomenal character that you have when you look at things, and it presents you with certain features and objects in the world. So one point to make is that it's possible to have seemings without perceptual experience. So the a priori seemings would be one example of that. When it just seems to you that 2 + 2 = 4, that doesn't come with any perceptual experience, any phenomenology that's sensory attached, arguably. Other examples, it seems like, suggest that the same is true even for propositions about your immediate environment. So even what we might describe as empirical propositions can come without the perceptual phenomenology that's essential to experiences. So, for instance, imagine you're looking at a banana. You have that visual experience of a banana that you always have when you look at bananas. But then you close your eyes, right? If you consider whether there's a banana there, you're still going to have a propositional seeming that there's a banana on the table, right? But in that case, the seeming comes without that distinctive visual phenomenology that you have with eyes open, right? So you have the seeming, but without the perceptual experience. In that case, it comes partly from memory. So there's that difference as well. But for my purposes, it's a case of knowing something about your environment or being justified in something about what's on the table, based on the seeming, but the seeming is not itself visual experience. Your eyes are closed. So there's one example. A more controversial example might be just Ned Block's case of super blind sight. We can imagine characters who when they look at bananas, it seems to them that there are bananas on the table, but it seems to them in the way that blind sight victims, they don't have the visual experiences of the banana on the table. They just have the seemings in the absence of the visual experience. So if that kind of thing is conceivable, then there's another example. Blind sight victims, or maybe super blind sight victims, if not actual happens. Okay, so those are cases where there are seemings without perceptual experience. Other seemings, though, and these are going to be really crucial when I get to the epistemology portion of today's lecture. Other seemings are at least partly anchored in the visual phenomenology, but they go beyond it. The seeming goes beyond what's, strictly speaking, in the experience. Right? That's what I'm going to convince you of. So this is a little bit more, not yet. So just think here about what we'll call perceptual demonstrative seemings. So these are just of the form, that, you look at the banana and you think, that is a banana. And so, you either point to it or just mentally you attend to the visual experience, right? And you label it as a banana. You label that visual presentation with the concept of banana, right? Or you just think that's yellow, right? When you see the banana. By attention, you kind of pick out the yellow parts and you label it with a concept of yellow. So just perceptual demonstrative seemings, as I'm thinking of them, they've got the general form, but that is F. So just that targets something that's in visual experience, and then the F labels it with some concept. Does that make sense? So, and again, it's not like I'm making it. It's a fairly common distinction to think about demonstrative beliefs, at least. But there will also be demonstrative seemings as well, which naturally give rise to the beliefs. So here's a little bit different distinction, and I think this one is my own distinction. So I'm not aware of people who draw quite this distinction. So you'll be on your guard. This one may be half-baked. But think about seeing a banana just in ordinary life and thinking to yourself, or just thinking, what color is that? And you're going to have a seeming, right? That is yellow, right? It's going to seem to you that it's yellow, the banana. I'm going to call that, and I'll give you some other cases as well, matching label demonstrative seemings. Because when you think about, when you think that is yellow, right? In ordinary light, while you're looking at the yellow part, what you're really trying intentionally to do is to, with the concept yellow, to match the visual presentation that's before you of the yellowness, right? So that's why I'm calling it a matching label. So compare it with, to see a contrast, compare it with a non-matching label. So suppose you, it's nighttime and the lights are out, right? But you knew there was a banana in your fruit bowl on the table before you went to bed. You knew it was a ripe banana, right? So you're wandering around at night. You don't turn on the lights. So you see the banana, but it's dark, right? It's just light enough to be able to distinguish shapes, but you don't have the yellowness being presented in the experience because it's dark. Well, you might still think, what color is that? And it might still occur to you, again, partly based on memory, that's yellow, right? Or maybe just partly based on your knowledge that it's a banana, and bananas are usually yellow, right? It's going to seem yellow in that case, but it's not going to seem yellow in the same way that it did with the lights on, right? So in that case, I'm going to describe that as a non-matching label demonstrative seeming. Because there, when you label that banana's surface, mentally label it by thinking of it as yellow or by it seeming yellow, it's not like you're trying to match the contents of your experience in that case. You're going beyond the contents of your experience when it seems so to you. So there's a case of a non-matching label, demonstrative seeming. Or here's another case. So in the philosophy literature, elm, I'm taking for granted, is a natural kind. There are certain experts who are very good at recognizing elms, and other people, and I'm included, I've never learned to recognize an elm tree, partly so I can use it as a philosophical example in talks like this. Right, so I'm a novice when it comes to recognizing elms. But, you and I are standing next to an elm, you tell me, that's an elm. I trust you because I know you're good at recognizing trees. So when I look and think, what kind of thing is that? It's going to seem to me, this time based on testimony, right? But it's going to seem to me that that's an elm. Not in quite the perceptual way, right? And pretty explicitly, I'm labeling that, where I'm looking at the tree, with my concept of an elm, but I know that's going beyond what the experience has in it in that case. So I'm assuming, as I mentioned before, some philosophers do think that elmhood, the property of elmhood, could be a part of the phenomenal character of your experience if you're an expert. So they think, if you really got good at it, and we want to describe what it's like for you to look at an elm, we'd have to describe all the shapes that you're seeing, because they play a role in what it's like to see an elm for you. We'd also have to say, well, there's this other thing, elmhood, and it's also, you're being presented with it as an expert, right? But I'm not. I don't know how to recognize that. So even if you think that could sometimes be a part of the phenomenal character of experience, it's not going to be for me as a novice. But it can be a part of the seeming, right? If I hear it by testimony from someone whom I trust. So again, that's going to be another case of a non-matching label, demonstrative seeming. Because, again, for me as a novice, when it seems that way to me, this concept is not trying to capture what's presented in the experience. I'm not even intending it that way. Right? It goes beyond very explicitly what's given to me in the experience. Yeah.
Sorry, just clarification on, I tried to miss it.
Yeah.
Are you saying that both non-matching label demonstrative seemings and matching label demonstrative seemings are the sorts of things that go beyond perceptual experience, or just the non-matching ones go beyond perceptual experience?
Yeah. So hold on just a second, because I'll.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
I think there's a sense in which they each do, right? But there's a clear sense in which non-matching label ones do, right? Because they're just going beyond the phenomenal contents of experience, and they're not even trying to capture the phenomenal contents of experience, right? So yeah, in that case, it's clear they go beyond in a pretty straightforward way. Yeah. So what about the matching label demonstrative seemings? And here I want to say there's a sense in which they go beyond the phenomenal content of experience as well, and it's roughly this sense. Often it's an achievement to have a seeming that successfully matches the phenomenal contents of your experience. So the speckled hen sorts of examples, I don't know how many of you know of that. The speckled hen is an example that comes up a lot in Epistemology and Perception, and I've written quite a bit on it. But suppose you're looking at a hen that has 23, very clearly articulated speckles on it, or you just see 23 speckles on a chalkboard. And there's no kind of ambiguity, there's no smudges or anything. They're clearly 23 speckles. Well, if you're like me, if you're not told that there's 23 speckles there, it's not going to seem to you that there are 23 speckles, right? So you'd have to count. You'd have to count in order to see it. Nevertheless, it might seem to you that there's 23 speckles, namely after you count. And suppose you count, and now you think, how many speckles are there? 20. Well, that's 23 speckled, you might say, looking at the 23, three different speckles. Now, that's going to be a matching label concept, a matching label seeming in the distinction that I want to make here. Because there, you're trying, there's a kind of intention for that concept of 23 speckledness to match what's given there in experience, right? And again, if you're like me, that's going to be the result of counting, or I ask Alan how many there are, and of course I trust Alan, so he tells me there's 23, so it seems to me there's 23 there. But of course, you could also be an expert about that too, or, in principle at least. We could imagine cases where someone's just very quick. Oliver Sacks pretty famously writes about autistic twins who do this very quickly, and it certainly seems like a possible case where, possible in part because we know you can do it for maybe up to 6 or 7. You just look at them, and pretty quickly, without counting, it seems to you there's 3 there, right? It's easy for 3, right? So there's a kind of contrast between more skillful people might have a simple recognitional belief that there are 23 speckles, where they don't have to count explicitly. It's a pretty automatic process, characteristic of simple recognitional beliefs. But for both the novice and the expert at recognizing 23 speckles, it's going to be when they have the seeming, it'll be a matching label seeming. Matching label seeming again because there's an intention for the labeling concept, the concept that labels what that is, to capture what's there in experience, what the experiential content is. So can I pause there? Is that, as I said, that's the one so far that's is my invention of a distinction to make here. And there'll be some things that turn on it. But here's one way to kind of characterize a little bit more formally what a matching label seeming is, what it's supposed to be. If something's a matching label seeming, then if we know that the phenomenal content of the experience is veridical, if we know that it's, take the speckled hen case, if we know that it's properly, that it really is presenting you with 23 speckles, well then the seeming is going to be veridical too, just in case it correctly describes or matches the experiential content. Does that make sense? So, you see the 23 speckles, it's got 20, that's, if we want to capture what it's like for you to see 23 speckles, we got to say, well, there's exactly 23 speckles there, because one more and it would have felt different to you from the inside, right? Supposing that experience is veridical, there really are 23 speckles there, well, when it seems to you that there are 23 speckles, the seeming is going to be true as well if the experiential content is veridical, and if the seeming matches that content. Okay, pause one more time. You like that distinction? We can come back to it.
Is the argument of this section supposed to establish that experiences are not a species of seeming? Is that important later on or not? And just because some of the evidence is that there are seemings that don't involve experience.
Yeah. There's seemings that don't involve experience, and there's experiences that don't involve seemings.
What was the experience that doesn't involve seeming? it's whether there were seemings without perceptual experience. And
Yeah.
there are also seemings that are that go beyond
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
But is there any reason to think that experiences themselves aren't a type of seeming, perhaps a seeming with a particular phenomenal character, or even maybe a seeming deriving from a particular sense organ? You do it more external.
Yeah.
Aren't your seemings propositional?
Yes, so seemings are propositional. So if you think experiences have kind of non-conceptual.
That's helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
And were you thinking that, or sort of?
Well, I don't want to be too wedded
Yeah.
to that. I mean, I think really all I need is just.
Because you were thinking it was non-propositional at
I
the
thought
experience
that's what,
level.
I thought at least you could have experiences that aren't seemings, that you could have experiences that are non-propositional.
That sounds right, yeah.
Which
that
some of
sounds
the
right.
ones that you mentioned sounded that way.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Although if they're propositional, but they just have the contents that they have, or have some kind of demonstrative element to them. Well, I don't know. Here's what I want to. I think here's what all I really need to say. I mean, even if you think that they're kind of a species of seemings, all experiences, you at least need to draw something like this distinction to explain how the seemings, as I'm talking about, the things I'm naming seemings can come apart from the experiences. So, if you want to say they've got content, I mean, I guess I am committed to saying that they've got content. Maybe it's a different kind of content. I don't know. I get pretty confused with papers about conceptual and non-conceptual content. So I want to kind of steer clear of that debate if you can. That help, Alan? So you've at least got to make some kind of distinction here between to explain these kind of speckled hen sorts of cases, between the very explicit seeming and the experience that's underneath it.
No, that's helpful.
Okay, let's get to some epistemology. So consider first the experiential content principle. So this is just the idea that if your perceptual experience provides you, S's perceptual experience provides immediate justification for believing that is F, if and only if S is believing that is F would qualify as a successful matching label belief. So I put that kind of in terms of the matching label, non-matching label distinction. But essentially the idea is this. If your experience has a certain content, and you have, so my experience has the content of yellowness when I see the banana, and then I form the seeming, it seems to me that is yellow. Well, the seeming there matches the yellowness that's in the experience, that's presented in the experience. So the experiential content principle says I have some justification, right, for believing that that is yellow. Now, my main objection to this is the problem of the speckled hen, the epistemological problem of the speckled hen, which we already, almost alluded to. And so the idea is just the idea that that experiential content is sufficient for a justified belief that matches that content. That's not going to work in the case of, you're seeing 23 speckles. The principle implies then that you have immediate justification for believing that there's 23 speckles exactly there. But you don't have justification for it. At least you don't by just looking at it. You would if you counted, but that would be a kind of inferential process. The experience itself doesn't give you that justification. So there it is in a speckled hen sort of cases where you're counting objects. But the same idea is at work. It doesn't even have to do so much with complexity of experience. So if you think about auditory cases, I don't have perfect pitch, so when I hear middle C being played on a piano, if we want to describe the content about my experience, its phenomenal character, you have to say, I think, that it's middle C rather than the D above middle C that's being played on the piano. That's what's a part of my experience. An experience of D would feel different, right? But having middle C be a part of the content of my auditory experience doesn't give me immediate justification for believing that a middle C is being played. Again, it would if I had perfect pitch. So for some people, arguably it does, but not in my case. You can also do the same thing with color. I mean, if I don't know what periwinkle looks like, right? I mean, if I look at a particular color, it might be periwinkle, right? But it's not going to give me justification for thinking that that's periwinkle, right? If I don't have the ability to recognize that at a glance. So there's several speckled hen sorts of objections. And I'm going to leave this second one for the sake of time and go on, because I've got lots more speckled hen fun to be had. So let's move on to unrestricted phenomenal conservatism. So this is Michael Huemer and Chris Tucker's view. And they just rest their case on Seemings. For them, what's really doing the justificatory work in perception and in intuition, a priori intuition, and in other cases as well, maybe in introspection as well, is the seeming. That's what's doing the heavy lifting. So they rest on this principle of phenomenal conservatism, which just says, if it seems to you that P, then in the absence of defeaters, you thereby have at least some degree of justification for believing that P is true. So if it seems to you that it's true, then that gives you some justification. And if you don't have defeaters, then it gives you maybe the knowledge level justification. Now, Chris Tucker is very explicit in defending PC by saying that it has lots of, that it's the best explanation to several epistemological problems. And one of the ones he points to is actually the problem of the speckled hen. So here's what he says about the speckled hen. Remember, one of the problems with the speckled hen is to explain how, when I see 23 speckles, I don't have prima facie justification for believing that it's 23 speckled. I'd have to count. I don't have immediate justification for that proposition. But we could easily imagine epistemic agents who are much better than I am, for whom that would be the case, right? So what's the difference between us? The experiential content principle can't explain the difference, because we both have the same experiential content, and it has 23 speckles in it. What Tucker says is, well, look, here's the difference. For me, when I look at the 23 speckles that we're imagining, it'd be really nice to draw those. When I see the 23 speckles, it doesn't seem to me that there's 23 speckles, unless I count, right? So that's why I'm not justified, because I don't have the seeming. It doesn't seem that there's 23 speckles there. But arguably for Oliver Sacks' twins, who are really good at this, when they look at the matchsticks on the floor, and they have the experience, maybe even the same experiential content that I do, but then they also have a seeming, right? It seems to them that there's 23 matchsticks. So what explains the difference is the seeming, and that's the real thing that's doing the epistemic work for Tucker. Tucker also thinks this has good implications for experts, the difference between the expert and the novice. So why don't I have a justification when I see elm trees for thinking that it's an elm, but the expert does? Answer: it seems to the elm expert that it's an elm, right? But when I look at it, it doesn't seem. That doesn't cause a seeming that there's an elm there for me. Okay, so that's the view. Here's the objections. Here's why this doesn't work. So I'm here following, but going to the speckled hen sorts of cases in what I think is a novel where it has been underappreciated, at least in the literature. So Peter Markey has a couple of counterexamples to PC that he thinks. I agree with him that these just make it not work. One of them is what he calls, what I'm calling a date of planting case. So he imagines that he's going into his backyard. There's an elm tree in his backyard. He imagines two propositions that might seem to him to be true. One is that there's an elm tree, and then another just occurs for no apparent reason, or maybe, for bad epistemic reason. And it's a cognitive glitch or something. And that's that tree was planted on a particular date, 1973, March 12th, right? That it was planted on that date. And Markey says, well, maybe the elm tree case, that's justified for me. I think he's pretty good at telling elms when he sees them, unlike me. But Markey says, look, that date of planting seeming, that shouldn't justify. There's no kind of, we're not imagining there's a sign on the tree that says planted on March 12th, right? There's no nothing in the visual character of the experience that's even a sign of date of planting, right? That you could even go off of to get information about the date of planting. So he says, look, it's crazy to say that just the fact that seems to me to be true should justify. It doesn't justify because it's too divorced from experience. His second case goes like this. He imagines two gold prospectors, one of whom they're both panning for gold. One of them looks at a rock, and he's a really good rock gold expert. So he looks at it, and he really quickly determines that's gold, based on his excellent recognition skills that he's developed over the course of years. Right. The second prospector, also panning for gold, looks at a rock, and he really wants it to be gold because he'd love to be rich. And that wishful thinking makes it seem to him that that rock is gold. Right? So Humer says, and this seems exactly right to me, a propositional seeming that's the result of wishful thinking in that way doesn't justify you. It doesn't give you justification for thinking that something's gold. You shouldn't say that these two characters that I described are on par because they both had, to both of them it seemed that there was gold there. The one who was using his really good skills, he's justified. But the one who's just doing wishful thinking, that caused the scene, no justification. He doesn't get any props of the scene for that. So that seems exactly right. Notice that in that case, it's really a natural kind sort of concept that's at work. So one thing one thing that's I think a bit underappreciated is you don't have to go to cases like gold where there's a lot of expertise and it's a natural kind in order to draw this contrast. In fact, you can do it with the speckled hen sort of case too, where as follows. Here's the story of the unfortunate farmer. Maybe he's unfortunate. He's a wishful thinking farmer. So he's heard that 23 speckled hens lay gold eggs, right? So I'd really like to find one. So he sees this hen, and but he's not like one of the Oliver Sacks autistic cases. I mean, he's just like you and me with respect to telling the numbers of speckles on things. But he sees this hen, and as it happens, any hen that has between 20 and 30 speckles, he's disposed for it to seem to him that it has exactly 23 because he wants the gold, right? So the wishful thinking causes for him the seeming that there's something that's 23 speckled there. Make sense? Right? So, I contend that's not a case of justification. I mean, PC says that because of the seeming, he gets some degree of justification, absent defeaters, but it looks like he doesn't get justification because of wishful thinking. Even if he's right? I mean, even if this happens to be a 23 speckled hen, just the fact that the seeming was caused by the wishful thinking rather than anything about the experience, and the experience being of 23 speckles, looks like it's not a candidate for justification. So there, a speckled hen sort of case. It looks, I have been a poor manager of time. Can I give you, it's 4:28 now, we started at 3:30.
Like a minute or two after. I mean.
Okay, well, let me give you quickly a rundown of the sensible dogmatism and at least hint. Well, here goes. In 4 minutes, I'll try to speed up. So here, Brooke Brogard has recently defended a view that tries to find a middle ground between ECP and phenomenal conservatism. And I think this is exactly the right sort of space to occupy. So Brogard argues, in part based on the Markey cases, that if we just trust any old seeming, that would be bad. We don't want an epistemic principle that says any old seeming gets you even prima facie justification. What we want is for the seeming to be properly grounded in experience, right? So we want the seeming to be responsive in a certain way to experience. So she gives an account of what it is for seeming to be grounded in the content of experience. And the account essentially has two parts to it. It's a seeming has to have what she called, actually I'm calling this, her experience to seeming reliability condition. So it's got to be reliably connected to the content of the experience, and it's also got to be reliably connected to the content of the world. That's the seeming to world condition. So let me read this to you real quickly, and I'll give you a quick example to explain what she has in mind, and then I'll try to criticize it. So content grounding goes like this. She says, a seeming of the form, it seems to A as if Q is grounded in the content P of a particular perceptual, introspective, or memory-related experience E had by A, if and only if the seeming meets the following two conditions. So first of all, reliably, if P is a content of E, then it seems to A as if Q. And reliably, if it seems to A as if Q, then Q is true. So let's put this in action. I mean, she thinks this works with the gold prospector case. It gets you a better result. So think about the wishful thinking gold prospector. It seems to them that that's gold, right? But it seems to them based on wishful thinking, not any kind of good process. So why don't they have a justification? Well, they failed the experience to seeming reliability condition. That condition says, essentially, if P is a content of E, so if gold, the quality of being gold is a content of the experience, then it will seem to the subject that that's gold. It doesn't have to be the same content. So if it seems that there's some particular shape that all gold has and some particular color, right? If that experiential content reliably leads to its seeming that it is gold, then you meet that part of the condition. And that's not true for the wishful thinking character, right? Because they would have thought that this was gold even if it had been had a different look to it, right? So they're going to fail the experience to seeming reliability condition. They're also going to fail the seeming to world reliability condition, right? Because there's going to be lots of times when it seems to them that there's gold, but there's not, right? So what Brogard says is, if you're justified, the seeming has to be reliably connected to the world, so that if it seems to you the world some way, it is in nearby possible worlds or statistically, right? And then the further twist is she frames phenomenal conservatism to just say seeming's justified, but only if they're grounded in experiential content. Okay, so here we go. The view doesn't work. I've got criticisms of both the experience to seeming reliability condition and the seeming to world condition. If you'll bear with me for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes, and sorry to be over time, I'll give you a sketch of those and then take questions. So here's one. Here's a counterexample that's inspired by, a case of Alvin Plantinga presents back when I was first learning epistemology. When he gives all these great, examples, usually involving cosmic rays and things like that. It's a great time to be in epistemology. So here's my case. So suppose I'm struck by cosmic rays that have the following effect on me. Whenever I experience the color blue, it seems to me that 8,549 is not a prime number. That proposition just seems true whenever I see blue. Now 8,549 is composite, so that's going to be a reliable seeming, right? It matches the world super well, necessarily true even. But it doesn't look like that belief is justified. And it's not just the cosmic rays that I think elicit the intuition that it's not justified. It's also kind of Markey's data planning case, the lesson of it, just doesn't have anything to do with the experience of blue, right? So it seems really strange to say that seeming is grounded in my experience of blue, just because it is consistently connected with the experience of blue, and just because it happens to be reliable. So I think she's missed the point of Markey's data planning case, even though she thinks that, well, the account rules it out. Here's a speckled hen sort of case with the same upshot. The fortunate farmer again. I think she doesn't yet get out of the speckled hen case, speckled hen examples, although she thinks she does. So again, the way I was describing the speckled hen, the fortunate farmer, anytime he sees between 20 and 30 speckles, he thinks there's exactly 23, owing to wishful thinking, because he really wants the gold, right? He thinks 23 speckles mean you're going to get some gold. So in that case too, he's going to meet the experience to seeming reliability condition. Because it's a nice consistent connection. Anytime he's got a content with between 20 and 30 speckles, it produces 23, right, as this content of the seeming. That's 23 speckles is what it produces. Nice consistent connection there. So it looks like it's going to be grounded in experience. Now, in that case, it doesn't meet the seeming to world connection because the seeming is going to go wrong in lots of cases, right? When he sees a 24 speckled hen, it's not going to work. But I think that doesn't save the principle for 2 reasons. One, I mean, you could tweak the example, in ways where it's reliable. So it just happens that the only hens that there are anywhere around are 23 speckled, right? But he doesn't know that. Or maybe there's a nice benevolent demon who, always, whatever number of speckles he thinks something has, the benevolent demon just makes it be that, makes it match the world. So, there's ways to do that. But more importantly, if what the content grounding is supposed to capture is in part that a seeming be grounded in experience, It just seems like this one's not. It's not the result of a good skill of transitioning from an experiential content to a seeming content. And that ought to be captured by the experience to seeming reliability condition, but it's not. So I think it still works as an example. Okay, I'm aware I'm running out of time, so I've got a great last objection to Brogard, but we can talk about that in Q&A, and I can tell you more about where we're going from here. So, questions?